When someone you care about inflicts pain, whether through words, actions, or indifference, it feels deeply personal. And why wouldn't it? You trusted them. You let them in. But here's the truth that no one wants to admit. It's not always about you. In fact, most of the time, it has nothing to do with you at all. Men who hurt others often act from a place of insecurity, unresolved trauma, or emotional immaturity rather than inherent malice. This truth is difficult to accept because the pain they inflict feels so personal, so deliberate. When someone you trust betrays that trust or causes you harm, it is natural to assume their actions are a direct reflection of how they feel about you. But more often than not, their behavior says far more about their internal struggles than it does about your worth or value. Understanding this distinction is crucial if you want to free yourself from the emotional weight of their actions. At the core of many harmful behaviors lies insecurity. When a man does not feel fundamentally secure within himself, whether that insecurity is rooted in his appearance, his intelligence, or his ability to succeed, he may project those feelings outward. Instead of facing his inadequacies directly, he may attempt to assert dominance over those around him. This behavior is not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it is subtle and manipulative. A man who feels small may try to make others feel smaller to elevate himself. If he doubts his worth, he may criticize, belittle, or undermine others to maintain a fragile sense of superiority. This insecurity-driven behavior is not an expression of strength, but a desperate attempt to hide his weakness. Unresolved trauma is another powerful force behind the actions of men who hurt others. Many people carry wounds from their past, painful experiences of rejection, abandonment, or failure that shape how they engage with the world. If a man has never addressed or processed these wounds, they remain active beneath the surface, influencing his relationships in profound and often destructive ways. For example, a man who experienced emotional neglect as a child may struggle to express vulnerability as an adult. Rather than allowing himself to feel exposed, he may lash out or withdraw when he senses closeness or intimacy. The people around him become collateral damage in his effort to protect himself from feelings he cannot control. This behavior is not always conscious. Many men who hurt others do so without fully understanding why they act the way they do. But ignorance of their pain does not erase the consequences of their actions. Emotional immaturity also plays a significant role. Maturity is not merely a function of age, it is the ability to navigate emotions responsibly and treat others with care and consideration. A man who is emotionally immature lacks the tools to handle complex feelings like frustration, jealousy, or fear in a healthy way. When faced with these emotions, he may react impulsively, causing harm to those around him. This immaturity often stems from a lack of emotional education. Many men are raised in environments that discourage emotional expression, teaching them that strength means suppressing vulnerability. As a result, they never learn how to process or communicate their feelings effectively. When emotions inevitably arise, they may externalize their discomfort through anger, blame, or manipulation. It is important to recognize that these explanations are not excuses. Understanding why someone behaves a certain way does not mean you must tolerate that behavior. A man's insecurities, traumas, or immaturity do not justify the harm he inflicts on others, but recognizing the root causes of his behavior can help you separate his actions from your identity. When someone hurts you, it is easy to internalize that pain, to believe that you are unworthy, unlovable, but their actions are a reflection of their inner turmoil, not a measurement of your value. This understanding also allows you to see patterns more clearly. When you recognize that harmful behavior often originates from unresolved internal issues, you can begin to identify the warning signs earlier. Men who hurt others frequently display predictable patterns of behavior: excessive defensiveness, an inability to accept responsibility, or a tendency to blame others for their problem. By becoming aware of these patterns, you can protect yourself from becoming entangled in their emotional dysfunction. Moreover, recognizing these underlying causes empowers you to shift your focus. Instead of asking, "Why did he treat me this way?" you can ask, "What does his behavior reveal about him?" This shift is crucial because it places the responsibility for his actions where it belongs, on him. You cannot control another person's emotional wounds, but you can control how much access you grant them to your life. Understanding the root causes of harmful behavior also helps you let go of the illusion that you can fix someone else. Many people fall into the trap of believing that if they are patient enough, loving enough, or understanding enough, they can heal a broken man. But healing is an inside job. No amount of external love can repair internal wounds if the person carrying them is unwilling to confront and address them. When you recognize that a man's hurtful actions stem from his unresolved issues, you free yourself from the exhausting and ultimately futile task of trying to save him. This knowledge also fosters compassion, not for the sake of excusing his behavior, but for the sake of your own emotional well-being. When you understand that people who hurt others are often themselves in pain, it becomes easier to release the resentment and bitterness their actions may have caused. Carrying anger towards someone who harmed you only extends their power over you. Compassion does not mean allowing them back into your life. It means freeing yourself from the emotional burden of their dysfunction. Ultimately, understanding why men hurt others is not about rationalizing their behavior or diminishing your pain. It is about reclaiming your perspective. When you see the deeper reasons behind their actions, you can detach from the belief that their behavior defines your worth. You are not the cause of their pain, and you are not responsible for their healing. The most powerful thing you can do is recognize your value, enforce your boundaries, and refuse to carry the weight of someone else's unresolved struggles. When a man hurts others, whether through emotional manipulation, neglect, or outright aggression, it is often a reflection of his internal need to exert control. This need for control does not emerge in a vacuum. It is a manifestation of inner chaos projected onto those around him. At its core, this behavior stems from a profound sense of insecurity and fear of vulnerability. When a man feels powerless within himself, he may seek to dominate his external environment as a way to regain a sense of authority and stability. This dynamic plays out in subtle and overt ways, from dismissive comments that chip away at someone's confidence to more blatant attempts to control a partner's thoughts, actions, and autonomy. For many men who hurt others, control becomes a coping mechanism to manage their internal disorder. If a man feels that his life is slipping beyond his grasp, whether due to financial stress, personal failures, or unresolved emotional pain, he may attempt to reclaim a sense of dominance by controlling those closest to him. This control allows him to avoid facing the parts of himself that feel weak or inadequate. Instead of acknowledging his own vulnerabilities, he externalizes his inner turmoil by restricting or diminishing others. This behavior is not about love or care, even if it is often framed that way. It is about creating a dynamic where he feels superior because deep down he feels profoundly powerless. In many cases, the need to control stems from early life experiences. If a man grew up in an environment where love and acceptance were conditional, based on performance, obedience, or emotional suppression, he may internalize the belief that control is the only way to avoid pain. For instance, if he experienced neglect or abandonment, he may develop an unconscious fear of being powerless or rejected again. To protect himself from experiencing that vulnerability, he may attempt to control others to prevent situations that trigger his underlying fears. This is not always a calculated or intentional act. Many men who hurt others through control do so because they have never been taught how to manage their emotions or trust others without manipulating their environment. A key aspect of the control dynamic lies in emotional withdrawal and withholding. A man who feels out of control within himself may withhold affection, communication, or validation as a way to assert power over someone else. This behavior can be deeply confusing for the person on the receiving end because it creates an unpredictable environment where love and approval are given or taken away based on compliance. This form of emotional manipulation allows the man to maintain a sense of dominance while avoiding genuine emotional vulnerability. When a person is left constantly guessing where they stand, it reinforces the man's ability to dictate the terms of the relationship. This is not about connection, it is about maintaining psychological leverage. Another way men exert control is through criticism and devaluation. By pointing out perceived flaws or diminishing someone's self-worth, they can create a dynamic where the other person becomes dependent on their approval. This tactic allows the man to maintain superiority while ensuring the other person feels too insecure or unworthy to question the power imbalance. In some cases, this pattern can escalate into more overt forms of verbal or emotional abuse, where the man systematically undermines the other person's confidence. This behavior is rarely about the truth of the criticisms themselves. It is about using those criticisms to establish dominance and prevent the other person from feeling capable of independence or resistance. For many men, control also manifests through isolation. By limiting a partner's access to external support systems, such as friends, family, or independent activities, they reduce the likelihood that the person will seek outside perspectives or assistance. This form of control can be gradual, beginning with subtle suggestions and evolving into explicit demands. The more isolated someone becomes, the easier it is for the controlling man to maintain dominance without the risk of external interference. Isolation allows the man to shape the other person's reality, reinforcing the belief that they are powerless without him. At the psychological level, this need for control reflects a fragile ego and a deep fear of being unimportant or invisible. For men who lack a stable internal sense of self, exerting control over others provides temporary relief from their insecurities. If they can dictate how others feel or behave, it gives them the illusion that they are significant and powerful. This need for external control often reveals an internal void, a sense that without external dominance, they are nothing. However, this illusion is unsustainable. No amount of external control can resolve the internal chaos that drives these behaviors. The more a man relies on controlling others to stabilize his self-impediment, the more dependent he becomes on maintaining that dominance, leading to increasingly destructive relational patterns. It is also important to recognize that men who engage in controlling behaviors often lack the emotional literacy to identify and express their deeper feelings. Many have never been given the tools to navigate vulnerability or emotional discomfort. Instead, they develop rigid defenses to protect themselves from feelings they cannot process. This emotional immaturity perpetuates the cycle of control, because genuine intimacy requires the ability to tolerate uncertainty and emotional exposure. Without these skills, controlling others becomes a substitute for the emotional regulation they cannot achieve internally. Control is ultimately about avoiding accountability. If a man can manipulate the external world, he does not have to confront the discomfort within himself. This avoidance extends to relationships where controlling behaviors prevent meaningful emotional exchange. The person being controlled becomes a mirror reflecting the man's insecurities, and by dominating that mirror, he can avoid facing his own inadequacies. This is why men who rely on control are often resistant to change. They have built their entire emotional defense system around maintaining power as a way to shield themselves from pain. In many cases, the need for control escalates when a man feels his power slipping away. If a partner begins to assert independence or question the dynamic, it threatens the fragile illusion of authority he has constructed. This is why men who engage in controlling behaviors often react with heightened aggression or emotional withdrawal when their dominance is challenged. They interpret any form of resistance as a threat to their identity rather than an opportunity for mutual growth. This defensive reaction reveals how deeply rooted the need for control is in their sense of self. Emotional detachment in men is a complex and deeply ingrained phenomenon that often stems from societal conditioning, personal experiences, and psychological defense mechanisms. Many men are taught from a young age to suppress their emotions, to avoid vulnerability, and to equate emotional expression with weakness. This conditioning creates a profound disconnection between their inner emotional world and their outward behavior. As a result, when these men engage in relationships, they often struggle to form genuine emotional connections. This inability to engage on a deeper emotional level can manifest as coldness, indifference, or even cruelty, leaving those around them feeling unseen, unheard, and emotionally neglected. From childhood, many boys receive implicit and explicit messages that expressing emotions like sadness, fear, or tenderness is unacceptable. Phrases like "man up" or "stop being so sensitive" reinforce the belief that emotional openness is a liability rather than a strength. Over time, these messages shape how men relate to their own feelings and the feelings of others. To protect themselves from the pain of emotional exposure, many men develop a psychological armor that distances them from their internal experiences. This emotional detachment is not simply a personality trait, it is a survival strategy that has been reinforced through cultural and social norms. While this detachment may protect them from immediate emotional pain, it also limits their capacity for intimacy and genuine connection. When a man is emotionally detached, he often struggles to articulate or even recognize his feelings. This inability to engage with his own emotions makes it difficult for him to respond to the emotional needs of others. In relationships, this can create a painful dynamic where a partner's attempts to connect are met with indifference, defensiveness, or withdrawal. The emotionally detached man may view emotional conversations as threats rather than opportunities for connection. Instead of engaging with vulnerability, he may minimize or dismiss his partner's feelings, not out of malice, but because he lacks the tools to navigate emotional intimacy. This behavior can leave the other person feeling invalidated and alone, even in the context of a relationship. One of the most damaging aspects of emotional detachment is the way it undermines trust and emotional safety. In healthy relationships, emotional openness fosters a sense of security and mutual understanding. When a man is emotionally unavailable, his partner may feel as though they are constantly reaching for someone who remains out of grasp. This can lead to feelings of rejection and self-doubt as the partner begins to question whether they are worthy of love and attention. Over time, the absence of emotional reciprocity erodes the foundation of the relationship, creating a dynamic where one person gives and the other remains distant and disengaged. Emotional detachment often arises from unresolved trauma. If a man has experienced significant emotional pain in the past, whether through childhood neglect, loss, or relational betrayal, he may develop emotional numbness as a way to protect himself from future harm. This trauma response is not always conscious. In many cases, emotionally detached men are unaware of the origins of their behavior. They may rationalize their emotional distance as a preference for independence or a need to avoid drama. However, beneath this surface lies a profound fear of vulnerability. Allowing themselves to feel means risking exposure to pain, so they shut down emotionally as a defense mechanism. This emotional shutdown can become so habitual that it feels like an intrinsic part of their identity. Another factor contributing to emotional detachment is the cultural ideal of self-sufficiency. Many men are taught to value independence above all else, viewing emotional reliance on others as a sign of weakness. This belief system reinforces the idea that emotional needs should be suppressed or managed privately rather than shared openly. In relationships, this mindset can lead to emotional isolation, as the man resists depending on his partner for comfort or support. This emotional self-reliance may seem like strength from the outside, but it often masks a profound fear of being seen as weak or needy. As a result, emotionally detached men struggle to provide the emotional validation and responsiveness that are essential for maintaining close, intimate bonds. The impact of emotional detachment extends beyond romantic relationships. Friendships, family dynamics, and professional relationships can all suffer when a man is disconnected from his emotional life. In personal relationships, emotional detachment can create an invisible barrier that prevents genuine intimacy and trust. Friends and family members may perceive the detached man as distant, cold, or unapproachable, leading to strained or superficial interactions. In professional settings, emotional detachment can manifest as a lack of empathy or interpersonal sensitivity, limiting the man's ability to build collaborative and supportive work environments. This widespread impact underscores the profound consequences of emotional disconnection, not just for the man himself, but for everyone who interacts with him. Emotionally detached men often experience internal conflict. While they may appear composed on the surface, beneath their emotional armor lies a deep yearning for connection and acceptance. However, because they have been conditioned to view vulnerability as dangerous, they struggle to reconcile this longing with their fear of emotional exposure. This internal tension can lead to self-sabotaging behaviors, where the very strategies they use to protect themselves, emotional withdrawal, dismissiveness, or control, ultimately drive away the people they care about. This paradox leaves many emotionally detached men trapped in a cycle of loneliness and disconnection, unable to break free without confronting their fears and learning new ways of relating. It is important to understand that emotional detachment is not a fixed state. While it may feel ingrained, it is ultimately a learned response to emotional pain and social conditioning. With self-awareness and a willingness to engage in emotional work, men can begin to dismantle the walls they have built around their hearts. However, this process requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires a willingness to feel and to confront the vulnerabilities they have long avoided. Without this commitment to emotional growth, the patterns of detachment will continue to perpetuate harm in their relationships and within themselves. Men who hurt others often deflect blame as a way to avoid responsibility for their actions. This behavior is not simply an attempt to escape accountability. It is a defense mechanism rooted in a deep discomfort with self-reflection and personal failure. Blame shifting allows these men to maintain a fragile sense of self-worth while protecting themselves from the emotional consequences of their behavior. When confronted with the harm they have caused, they redirect attention away from their actions and onto external factors or the person they have hurt. This tactic is not only emotionally manipulative but also profoundly damaging to the people around them, as it distorts reality and undermines trust in relationships. At the core of blame shifting is an inability or unwillingness to face internal shame. For many men who engage in harmful behaviors, acknowledging their faults threatens their identity. If a man has built his sense of self around being competent, in control, or morally superior, admitting wrongdoing feels intolerable. Rather than confronting these uncomfortable truths, he deflects responsibility to preserve his self-image. This pattern often develops early in life, particularly in environments where mistakes were met with harsh criticism or where emotional vulnerability was seen as weakness. If a man learns that acknowledging his failures leads to rejection or punishment, he may adopt blame shifting as a survival strategy to avoid feelings of inadequacy and guilt. Blame shifting typically manifests in several distinct ways. One common tactic is minimizing the harm caused. Instead of taking responsibility, the man downplays the severity of his actions, insisting that the other person is overreacting or being too sensitive. This form of gaslighting invalidates the victim's feelings and experiences, making it harder for them to trust their own perceptions. By framing the other person as irrational or overly emotional, the man absolves himself of guilt while positioning himself as the reasonable one. This manipulation is subtle but effective, as it shifts the focus away from his behavior and onto the other person's reaction, leaving them questioning whether their pain is even valid. Another form of blame shifting involves turning the tables and making the other person feel responsible for the man's actions. Rather than acknowledging his harmful behavior, he suggests that he was provoked or that the other person's actions left him no choice. This tactic is particularly insidious because it not only evades accountability but also burdens the victim with guilt. For instance, if a man is emotionally abusive, he may claim that he only acts that way because his partner is too demanding or critical. This narrative shifts responsibility onto the person he has hurt, creating a dynamic where the victim feels compelled to change their behavior in the hopes of preventing further harm. The truth, however, is that no amount of external change can resolve the internal issues driving his behavior. Blame shifting can also take the form of playing the victim. When confronted with their behavior, some men will position themselves as the wronged party to deflect attention from their actions. By emphasizing their own struggles or hardships, they redirect the conversation away from the harm they have caused. This tactic is particularly effective in eliciting sympathy, as it frames them as misunderstood or unfairly criticized. In some cases, the man may bring up past wounds or traumas to justify his behavior, implying that his actions are excusable because of what he has endured. While it is true that unhealed trauma can shape how someone behaves, it does not negate personal responsibility. Playing the victim not only shifts the blame, but also manipulates others into minimizing or excusing the harm he has caused. The consequences of blame shifting extend far beyond the immediate conflict. Over time, it erodes trust and destabilizes relationships by creating an environment where accountability is consistently avoided. For the person on the receiving end, this behavior can be deeply disorienting. Being repeatedly blamed for someone else's actions can lead to confusion, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. In intimate relationships, blame shifting can foster a sense of powerlessness as the victim becomes trapped in a cycle of trying to fix themselves in the hope of earning fair treatment. This emotional manipulation makes it difficult for the victim to recognize the true source of the problem, often leaving them questioning their worth and sanity. Blame shifting also reinforces a cycle of emotional immaturity. When a man refuses to take responsibility for his actions, he denies himself the opportunity for growth and self-awareness. Personal accountability is a crucial part of emotional and relational maturity. Without it, there can be no genuine self-improvement. By consistently deflecting blame, these men remain trapped in patterns of destructive behavior, unable to confront the underlying issues driving their actions. This stagnation not only harms their relationships, but also perpetuates their internal sense of dissatisfaction and emotional turmoil. The longer blame shifting continues, the more entrenched these patterns become, making genuine change increasingly difficult. This pattern is not limited to romantic relationships. It also manifests in professional settings, friendships, and family dynamics. In the workplace, for example, a man who engages in blame shifting may refuse to acknowledge mistakes, instead pointing fingers at colleagues or external circumstances. This behavior undermines team cohesion and creates a toxic environment where others feel constantly on edge, fearing they will be scapegoated. In family dynamics, blame shifting can fracture relationships by fostering resentment and emotional distance. Children raised by a blame shifting parent may internalize feelings of guilt or inadequacy, carrying these burdens into their own adult relationships. The ripple effects of this behavior extend far beyond the immediate context, shaping how others view themselves and their worth. One of the most damaging aspects of blame shifting is the way it distorts reality. When someone is repeatedly told that they are the problem, they begin to internalize that narrative. This is particularly true in long-term relationships, where the repeated deflection of responsibility can wear down the victim's ability to trust their perceptions. Over time, they may begin to question whether they are indeed the cause of the conflict, leading to a loss of self-esteem and autonomy. This psychological manipulation not only serves to protect the blame shifter's fragile ego, but also traps the victim in a state of emotional dependence, making it harder for them to break free from the toxic dynamic. Ultimately, blame shifting is a form of emotional manipulation that allows men who hurt others to avoid the discomfort of self-examination. It is a strategy rooted in fear, the fear of being exposed, of being seen as flawed, and of confronting the emotional pain they have buried. While it may offer temporary relief from accountability, it comes at the cost of genuine connection and personal integrity. This behavior may allow them to maintain a sense of control, but it ultimately isolates them from the people who care about them and from the truth of who they are.
Decode relationships, transform connections. Welcome to the Motivation Hub, ladies and gentlemen. There's something you must understand about betrayal. It's not just a misstep, not just a lapse in judgment. It's a calculated act, a tearing of the sacred fabric of trust. And behind most betrayals, there isn't confusion. There's intention, especially when it's carried out by someone who wears a mask of charm, of goodness, of affection. That's the signature of the narcissist. Betrayal is one of the most devastating experiences a person can endure, and its weight is not merely emotional. It strikes at the very foundation of trust, identity, and safety. When someone betrays you, especially someone close, it isn't just the act itself that wounds you. It's the realization that everything you believed, every moment you shared, every truth you built your reality on was quietly contaminated. That is what makes betrayal so profoundly damaging. It's not just an external rupture, it's an internal collapse. What people often miss is that betrayal is rarely accidental. It's not typically the result of a confused or momentarily weak individual stumbling into harm. True betrayal, especially the kind woven into narcissistic abuse, is premeditated. It is a calculated violation. There is a decision involved. A decision to manipulate, to deceive, to exploit vulnerability for personal gain. And that is what separates ordinary failure from betrayal. One may forget a promise, but betrayal is a conscious abandonment of the very principle of trust. The narcissist knows exactly what they're doing. They may not admit it even to themselves, but on some level they are aware. They are not acting out of blind passion or innocent misjudgment. Instead, they are playing a role, crafting an illusion, slowly ensnaring their target through flattery, projection, and feigned intimacy. They study your weaknesses, not to help you grow, but to use them against you at the moment most convenient to their agenda. This is a mind that is not simply immature or wounded, it is predatory in its intent. The betrayal of a narcissist cuts deeper than most because of the duality they present. On one side, they wear the mask, attentive, caring, even vulnerable. They'll listen to your struggles, mirror your beliefs, express a desire to build something meaningful. But underneath that mask lies something else entirely. an ego so fragile that it requires constant validation, a self so empty that it can only survive by consuming the emotional energy of others. The betrayal comes not only when they turn against you, but when you realize they never truly existed in the way you thought they did. It wasn't a real connection. It was a performance, and you were cast as the unwitting support character. This is why betrayal at the hands of a narcissist is so psychologically disorienting. You are not simply grieving the loss of a person, you're grieving the loss of an illusion. And worse, you're left with the echoes of your own doubt. How could you not have seen it? How could someone say they loved you and simultaneously orchestrate your emotional downfall? But those questions, while natural, must be redirected because the failure isn't yours. It lies with the betrayer who chose manipulation over truth, who saw vulnerability not as a sacred trust, but as an opportunity to dominate. There's also a profound existential impact to betrayal. It makes you question not only who they were, but who you are. If someone you loved could so deeply deceive you, what does that say about your judgment, your sense of reality? That's the brutal collateral damage of betrayal. It doesn't just take away your relationship, it takes away your certainty. And regaining that takes time, deliberate healing, and a return to your own inner compass. But the damage left in the betrayer is just as real, though more hidden, more corrosive. Because even the narcissist, for all their deflections and justifications, cannot fully silence the truth. They may suppress it, drown it in distractions, or project it onto others, but it lives inside them like a toxin. And here's the truth. When you consciously choose betrayal, when you exploit another human being's trust, you invite a fracture into your own soul. You create an internal division between the mask you wear and the reality you know you're avoiding. That fracture doesn't just go away, it deepens, it haunts, and in the quiet moments when no one is around to validate or admire, the betrayer is left alone with themselves, and that is a terrifying place to be. So betrayal, especially by the narcissistic mind, is far more than a singular event. It's a decision to abandon truth. It's a strategic violation of what is sacred. And whether the consequences arrive today, next year, or in the final chapter of a life marked by deception, they arrive. The human psyche is structured in such a way that we cannot escape the consequences of our own choices, not indefinitely. The cost of betrayal is real, and it is paid not only by the victim, but inevitably by the one who chose to betray. The narcissist does not exist as a single, unified identity. They are a fractured self, split between what they present to the world and what festers beneath the surface. At their core, narcissists are deeply insecure individuals who lack a stable, cohesive sense of self. This instability is intolerable to them, so they construct a mask, a false self, an identity built not on authenticity but on image, manipulation, and control. This mask becomes their survival strategy. It allows them to navigate the world not through connection and vulnerability, but through dominance, seduction, and the manipulation of others' perceptions. The illusion they project is compelling. On the outside, they can appear charming, confident, successful, even deeply empathetic. They say the right things, mimic emotional responses, and often present as charismatic leaders or romantic partners. But this is not who they are. It's who they need others to believe they are in order to sustain their fragile ego. Because underneath the mask lies a void, an emotional hollowness that the narcissist cannot tolerate. They are not grounded in genuine self-worth, so they rely entirely on external validation, praise, admiration, control, fear. These are their sources of fuel. This is what's often referred to as narcissistic supply, and it becomes their addiction. This is why narcissists are drawn to empathetic, emotionally intelligent, or vulnerable individuals. They are not looking for equals. They are seeking mirrors. The narcissist needs someone to reflect back the image they wish to see in themselves. Powerful, needed, adored, envied. To do this, they engage in a psychological game of projection and manipulation. They learn your values, your wounds, your dreams, and they shapeshift to fit them. They create a false sense of connection, one that feels intense, magnetic, even transcendent. But it's all based on illusion. The narcissist is not revealing themselves. They are hiding behind a carefully crafted character. Once that connection is established, once trust is gained, the narcissist begins to tighten their grip. Subtly, the relationship dynamic shifts. It becomes less about mutual growth and more about dominance. They begin to undermine your confidence, distort your reality, make you question your worth, all while presenting themselves as your savior or your only source of love. This tactic is insidious because it doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in slowly, wrapped in moments of affection, fleeting kindness, or selective praise. The narcissist operates through confusion. They use inconsistency as a tool, keeping you guessing, keeping you chasing the version of them that no longer appears. What's especially disturbing is the narcissist's ability to remain emotionally detached from the damage they cause. They can watch someone break down in front of them and feel no guilt. Or if they do feel something, it's often frustration at being inconvenienced or exposed. They may feign empathy, but it's a performance, a calculated move to regain control. Real empathy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the narcissist illusion of superiority. So instead of owning their behavior, they shift blame, they gaslight, they recast themselves as the victim and you as the ungrateful or unstable one. This reversal of roles isn't just cruel, it's a method of psychological domination. This false self that the narcissist clings to is fragile. It constantly needs reinforcement. That's why narcissists often live in cycles of idealization and devaluation. When a new source of supply enters their life, they idolize them, shower them with attention and affection. But once that person begins to see through the mask, or no longer provides the admiration the narcissist craves, the devaluation begins. They criticize, withdraw, cheat, or manipulate, often in ways that leave the other person confused and devastated. And then, when the damage is done and the relationship is fractured beyond repair, the narcissist moves on, sometimes without looking back. But it isn't because they are strong or indifferent, it's because they cannot face the emotional consequences of what they've done. The narcissist cannot live without the illusion they've built. The reality of who they are, emotionally underdeveloped, fearful, envious, insecure, is too overwhelming to confront. So they hide in plain sight, constantly reinventing themselves, constantly seeking new victims, new supply, new mirrors to reflect back an image that feels acceptable. But the cost of this illusion is enormous. Every relationship they destroy, every person they betray, every truth they distort, these become bricks in the wall that isolates them from real intimacy, from healing, from self-awareness. They may appear confident, successful, or even enviable on the outside, but the mask is not them. It is a defense mechanism, and the longer they wear it, the more detached they become from anything real. The illusion becomes their prison. They spend their lives trying to be seen, admired, envied, while remaining completely unseen, unknown, unloved. Because love requires truth. And truth is the one thing the narcissist cannot bear to face. Karma is often misunderstood as a cosmic force that delivers punishment from the outside, like some divine retribution striking down the wicked in dramatic fashion. But in reality, karma operates in a much quieter, much more intricate way through the architecture of the human psyche, through the relationships we destroy, and through the internal consequences of our own actions. Especially for the narcissist, karma isn't necessarily an external force that shows up in a single catastrophic moment. It's the slow, inevitable unraveling of their mind, their peace, and their connections. It's the weight of what they've done pressing inward, not outward. When someone commits a betrayal, when they intentionally deceive, manipulate, and exploit another human being, something changes in the structure of their consciousness. Even if they outwardly celebrate the win of getting what they wanted, that victory comes at a cost. The human mind is not built to sustain lies indefinitely. We may suppress guilt, repress shame, justify our actions, and deflect blame, but the truth has a way of seeping in. It doesn't need to shout, it whispers, it lingers, and over time it eats away at the person from within. This is karma, not poetic vengeance, but the psychological bill that always comes due. For the narcissist, the consequences of their betrayal are magnified by their need to avoid accountability. The false self they present to the world is meticulously maintained, and admitting fault would risk shattering that illusion. So instead of owning their actions, they project their guilt onto others. They blame the victim, distort the narrative, rewrite history so they can remain the hero, or at least the misunderstood tragic figure. But this psychological maneuvering only deepens their inner fragmentation. Every lie told requires another to sustain it. Every manipulation demands more control. And slowly, the narcissist finds themselves ensnared in the very web they've spun for others. There's a psychological toll to living this way. On the surface, the narcissist may appear unfazed, even thriving. They may find new relationships, new opportunities, new ways to feed their ego. But underneath that surface is a growing chaos. They become increasingly paranoid, anxious, disconnected. They can't truly trust anyone because they know how easily trust can be broken because they themselves have broken it. They suspect others are playing the same games they play, and so they never feel safe. The very peace they robbed from others becomes the thing they can never have for themselves. Karma manifests in the form of broken relationships, in the loss of true connection, in the inability to build anything lasting or meaningful. People begin to see through the facade. Former sources of supply grow cold or indifferent. The attention they once thrived on no longer satisfies them. And with each failed attempt to secure admiration, with each crumbling illusion, the narcissist is forced to confront the hollowness they've tried so desperately to avoid. That confrontation may be delayed for months or even years, but it always comes. Because the human spirit, no matter how deeply buried, cannot be entirely silenced. Even in solitude, even in apparent success, the consequences of their actions live on. Regret may not show up in the traditional form of tears or apologies. For many narcissists, it reveals itself through restlessness, through the inability to enjoy what they once craved, through the quiet moments where their own reflection becomes unbearable. They may distract themselves with new partners, money, power, or status. But all of it is an attempt to outrun the psychological echo of the people they've harmed, the lies they've told, and the self they've abandoned in the process. The torment doesn't necessarily come from remorse over the people they've betrayed, but from the spiritual and emotional isolation they've created for themselves. The narcissist ends up living in a fortress of their own making. Untouchable, perhaps, but also untouched. There's no real joy, no real connection, no real peace. And this is the subtle but unrelenting form that karma takes. Not punishment from the outside, but disintegration from the inside. Not divine wrath, but psychological erosion. This form of karma is far more terrifying than external consequences because it can't be escaped. You can move to another city, find a new partner, change your wardrobe, start a new job, but you cannot outrun yourself. The person who betrays others lives with the knowledge, even if buried, that they have violated something sacred. They may suppress it, but suppression is not resolution. It is a ticking clock, a growing pressure, and one day it breaks through, sometimes in the form of depression, sometimes through rage, sometimes through complete emotional collapse. The mind and soul are built for truth, and any life structured around deception and betrayal is unsustainable. It may endure for a while, may even appear successful, but it is always crumbling behind the scenes. The narcissist who betrays others is not only shaping the downfall of those they harm, they are shaping their own. Because karma is not waiting around the corner with a thunderbolt. Karma is the consequence already unfolding in the background, waiting to become undeniable. It's the internal storm that builds with every betrayal until one day There is no mask thick enough, no distraction loud enough, no person willing enough to silence it. The narcissist's greatest fear is exposure. Not just being caught in a lie or called out for their behavior, but being truly seen for who they are beneath the mask. This fear drives nearly everything they do. Their charm, manipulation, and control aren't random personality traits. They are carefully developed defenses designed to protect a fragile ego that cannot withstand criticism, rejection, or vulnerability. The narcissist constructs a false self that they present to the world, and they cling to it as though their very survival depends on it, because in their mind it does. The real self, the one buried underneath layers of deception, shame, and insecurity, is too wounded to face. So they spend their lives hiding, deflecting, and performing. But the longer they live in this illusion, the harder it becomes to maintain, because people eventually notice. They see the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the emotional void. The narcissist starts to sense this, and it terrifies them. Exposure threatens the very structure of their reality. It challenges the narrative they've carefully constructed, that they are the victim, the hero, the misunderstood genius, the irreplaceable lover. If people start to question this narrative, if the truth about their manipulation begins to surface, the narcissist feels cornered, vulnerable, and out of control. And when that happens, their response is often extreme. Rather than admit fault or show humility, the narcissist doubles down. They attack, smear, and gaslight. They rewrite the story so they remain the innocent one, the betrayed one, the one who suffered. They will lie, distort, and scapegoat to preserve the illusion, because to them, the loss of control is not just an inconvenience, it's a threat to their identity, and they cannot afford to lose the image they've worked so hard to construct. To be exposed is to be revealed as weak, flawed, and dependent, things the narcissist cannot tolerate because their entire self-concept is built around superiority and self-sufficiency. This need for control is rooted in a deep-seated belief that they are unlovable, as they truly are. Somewhere along the line, consciously or unconsciously, the narcissist decided that authenticity was unsafe. Perhaps in early relationships, they learned that vulnerability led to shame or rejection. So instead of developing an integrated sense of self, they built a false one, designed not to be loved but to be admired. But admiration is not love. It is conditional, temporary, and fragile. It can vanish the moment someone sees through the mask. And so the narcissist must constantly guard against that possibility. They live in a state of hypervigilance, always managing impressions, always calculating, always preparing for the next perceived threat to their ego. Over time, this leads to chronic emotional instability. The narcissist becomes addicted to control because it is the only way they know how to feel safe. But the more control they seek, the more isolated they become. Real intimacy requires letting go of control. It requires openness, empathy, and truth. But the narcissist cannot risk that. So their relationships become transactional, manipulative, and ultimately hollow. And when these relationships inevitably collapse, the narcissist blames others. They cannot look inward, because to do so would mean acknowledging the very truth they spent their lives avoiding, that the problem is not out there, but within. What's tragic is that this cycle reinforces itself. The more the narcissist fears exposure, the more they control. The more they control, the more their relationships suffer. The more relationships suffer, the more isolated they feel. And the more isolated they feel, the more they fear exposure. It becomes a closed loop of psychological self-destruction. And the worst part is, from the outside, it may appear as strength. People might see confidence, power, and success. But beneath it all is someone terrified of being seen. Someone who feels empty, unsafe, and utterly alone. They may tell themselves that others are weak, that they alone have the strength to rise above emotion, that love is a game for fools. But deep down they know something is missing. That gnawing feeling, that low hum of anxiety, that relentless need to be admired, it's all a signal. A signal that no amount of control can substitute for connection. No illusion can ever replace the peace that comes from being genuinely known and loved for who you really are. But the narcissist resists this truth. They avoid it, deny it, and fight against it, because to admit it would mean acknowledging that everything they've built is a lie. And so they hide, not just from the world, but from themselves. They put on a face for every room they walk into. They become whoever they need to be to survive, but survival is not the same as living, and admiration is not the same as being loved. So even when no one confronts them, even when no one exposes them publicly, the narcissist lives with the unbearable tension of their own deception. That's the quiet torment they carry. A constant inner pressure to keep the illusion alive, knowing deep down it is always on the verge of crumbling. One of the most devastating aspects of a narcissist's betrayal is the psychological trauma it leaves behind, not just in the form of heartbreak or confusion, but in how it fractures the victim's very perception of reality. Narcissistic abuse is not always obvious. It doesn't necessarily arrive in the form of shouting, violence, or clear-cut cruelty. Often it's a gradual erosion of self-worth, a slow twisting of truth, a manipulation of emotions so subtle that the victim doesn't even realize it's happening until they're left disoriented, hollow, and full of self-doubt. This is what makes the pain so difficult to name. The narcissist doesn't just betray, they distort, reframe, and destabilize. At the beginning, the narcissist is magnetic. They mirror your values, your desires, your dreams. They give you attention in a way that feels intoxicating, even otherworldly. They seem to understand you without words, to see you in a way no one else has. It feels like destiny, like a connection that transcends logic. But what's really happening is that they're studying you. They're identifying what you want most and feeding it back to you, not out of love, but out of calculation. This is the phase where they hook you, where the illusion is at its strongest. They're building a version of themselves that fits perfectly into your emotional world. And in doing so, they gain your trust. Once that trust is secured, the dynamic begins to shift. The narcissist slowly introduces doubt, control, and subtle forms of invalidation. It may start with a small criticism, wrapped in a joke, then a moment of withdrawal, a cold silence, or sudden anger that leaves you scrambling to figure out what went wrong. You begin to question your instincts. You start walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace, trying to win back the version of them you met at the start. But that version is gone, or more accurately, it never existed. What remains is a person who manipulates reality, who gaslights, who punishes you emotionally whenever you begin to see the truth. This emotional manipulation fractures your sense of self. You doubt your memories, you question your emotional responses, you wonder if you're too sensitive, too needy, too much. The narcissist thrives in this space of confusion because it gives them power. As long as you're doubting yourself, you're not doubting them. As long as you're focused on fixing the relationship, you're not focused on how broken their behavior is. This reversal of focus is crucial to their control. They don't need to imprison your body, they only need to confuse your mind. Victims of narcissistic abuse often find themselves haunted by the betrayal long after the relationship ends. They replay conversations, analyze every detail, try to understand how someone who once seemed so loving could turn so cold, so cruel, so indifferent. This is not just heartbreak, it's trauma. A kind of emotional injury that rewires the brain to be hyper-emotional, mistrustful, and emotionally reactive. Relationships afterward may suffer, trust becomes harder, vulnerability feels unsafe, and the worst part is the narcissist often walks away without a visible scratch. At least for a time. They may move on quickly, find new admiration, even appear happier without you, but this appearance is part of their pattern. It's not healing, it's avoidance. Meanwhile, the victim is left to sort through the emotional wreckage. And the world often doesn't understand this kind of pain. Friends might say, just move on, or at least they're out of your life. But it's not that simple, because the wound isn't just about the loss. It's about the manipulation. It's about the erosion of self-trust. It's about the betrayal of someone who pretended to love you while simultaneously dismantling your identity piece by piece. That kind of injury doesn't just fade, it demands deep inner work to heal. The emotional residue of being betrayed by a narcissist lingers in the nervous system. Flashbacks, anxiety, depression, insomnia. These are not signs of weakness. They are the body's response to prolonged psychological manipulation. It's what happens when your reality has been so thoroughly distorted that you no longer know what's real. And regaining that clarity, reclaiming your identity, requires time, patience, and often support from people who understand the depth of this kind of trauma. The narcissist may never apologize. They may never acknowledge the damage. In fact, they might continue to twist the narrative, painting themselves as the one who was wronged. But their denial doesn't erase the truth. The pain you feel is real. The betrayal was real. And while it may feel like they've won, like they walked away untouched, the reality is the damage they leave in others always traces back to a damage within themselves. They didn't betray you because you were weak. They betrayed you because your strength, your light, your ability to love deeply revealed how empty they truly are. That reflection was unbearable for them, so they tried to destroy it. But in that process, something else happens. The victim, once broken, begins to rise. Not overnight, not without scars, but with a deeper understanding of themselves, of boundaries, of truth. And that journey, while painful, becomes the very thing that separates them from the narcissist forever. The capacity to heal, to grow, and to love without illusion. Eventually, the narcissist is forced to face the void they spent years avoiding. But this isn't always a dramatic collapse. Sometimes it's subtle. A quiet, creeping realization that no amount of attention, validation, or control fills the emptiness they carry inside. Because at some point, the mask begins to crack. The people who once admired them begin to pull away. The lies that once worked so smoothly begin to unravel. The power plays that used to get results start to fall flat. And when the illusions no longer hold, the narcissist is left alone, not just physically, but existentially. What's underneath all that manipulation and charm isn't strength, it's hollowness, a deep and unacknowledged fear of worthlessness. They've spent so long crafting an image, playing roles, and seeking admiration that they never developed the tools to actually know themselves. So when the applause stops, when the admiration fades, they're left with silence, and that silence is deafening. It brings with it all the pain they once deflected, all the shame they once projected, all the truth they spent their lives avoiding. This is when the real karma begins. Not in external punishment, but in the internal reckoning. The relationships they discarded no longer serve as emotional cushions. The people they hurt no longer return to give them one more chance. Their ability to manipulate starts to wear thin. People have seen through it. The patterns become recognizable, and instead of praise, they begin to receive distance, disinterest, or confrontation. The narcissist finds themselves in a cycle where their usual tools no longer work, and it terrifies them. They don't know how to function in a world that doesn't orbit around their ego. They may try to reconstruct their image with new people, new jobs, new stories. But it's not sustainable because the damage isn't circumstantial, it's structural. It's in their psyche, in their soul. It follows them into every room, every relationship. They might temporarily fool someone new, but it always ends the same way: chaos, collapse, and isolation. They cannot escape the consequences of being emotionally dishonest, not because the world is cruel, but because the human soul was never meant to thrive in a lie. Truth is the soil in which meaning grows, and the narcissist has uprooted themselves from that ground long ago. What's left is a chronic sense of emptiness, not boredom, not loneliness, emptiness, a void that no relationship, no success, no external reward can fill. They may lash out, become more controlling, or sink into depression. They may pretend they're fine, keep the mask on, and perform strength, but internally they know something is wrong. They feel it in their restlessness, the lack of joy, the inability to connect deeply. Their inner world becomes a prison of their own design, walls built from denial, control, and unresolved pain. The narcissist often doesn't have the courage to sit with that pain. Instead, they project it outward, blaming others, creating conflict, or seeking new distractions. But the more they run from it, the stronger it becomes. Because avoidance doesn't eliminate pain, it preserves it. The very strategies they use to survive become the same ones that destroy them. Every manipulation is a missed opportunity for growth. Every lie is a barrier to healing. Every betrayal is another brick in the wall that separates them from peace. In some rare cases, a narcissist may experience a crack in the mask so deep, so undeniable, that they begin to confront their own truth. But that process is excruciating, and most resist it. They would rather destroy a relationship than admit fault. They would rather live in isolation than face their shame. They would rather be admired falsely than be loved authentically. And so the cycle continues. They keep chasing approval, validation, and control, not realizing that these things are shadows of what they actually long for: meaning, connection, and wholeness. But those things can't be faked. They can't be earned through manipulation. They are born from truth, vulnerability, and self-awareness, the very things the narcissist has spent their life avoiding. So when the mask finally slips, when the performances no longer captivate, when the people who once fed their ego walk away, they are left with themselves. Not the image, not the illusion, but the self they never got to know. And that self is filled with sorrow, with unprocessed grief, with a lifetime of avoided accountability. This is karma, not an external punishment, but an internal confrontation. It's not the world turning against them. It's the realization that they have turned against themselves. They betrayed their own potential, sabotaged their own capacity for love, abandoned their own need for healing. The narcissist's greatest downfall isn't that others see their truth, it's that they eventually have to see it too. And when that moment comes, there is no applause, no distraction, no scapegoat left. Just the silence they've feared all along.
There's something deeply disturbing about the moment you realize that someone you trusted, maybe even admired, has been playing a manipulative game with you. It's a game of control, of carefully constructed illusions designed to keep you unsure, questioning yourself, and always on edge. But then something shifts. You start to see through it. You begin to recognize what's really happening. That moment of realization is life-changing. It's the instant when the deception becomes clear, when the fog dissipates and you finally understand that the person you've been dealing with is not who they pretended to be. Maybe you had suspicions for a long time. Perhaps there were subtle signs, small moments when something felt off, when their words and actions didn't fully align, when they twisted reality just enough to make you question yourself. But now the pieces fit together. Now you know the truth. This isn't just an intellectual realization. It's something you feel in your core, something you can no longer ignore. It's not just that you've recognized a pattern of manipulation or deceit. It's that you fully grasp what it means. You see the game for what it truly is. And suddenly you understand that you've been a player in it without even knowing the rules. The narcissist has spent an incredible amount of time creating an illusion, shaping your perception, making sure you see them in a way that serves their interests. But once you become aware, that illusion begins to crack. This change in awareness isn't just significant for you, it shakes their world too. Narcissists thrive on control. Their entire reality depends on manipulating others, keeping them uncertain, ensuring that they remain the center of their emotional and psychological universe. But when you start seeing through their tactics, when you emotionally detach, when you stop reacting the way they expect, they sense it. They notice the shift even before you say a word, and that terrifies them. Their control was always built on the assumption that you would never truly see them for who they are. That's why they put so much effort into making you second guess yourself, into keeping you feeling uncertain about your own perceptions. The moment you stop playing along, their foundation begins to crumble. Suddenly, you don't react the way you used to. Their insults no longer have the same effect. Their guilt trips don't work like they once did. Instead of feeling confused or hurt, you feel clarity. And that shift is like an earthquake in their carefully crafted reality. For a narcissist, power comes from maintaining a particular image. They have worked tirelessly to create a version of themselves that is charming, intelligent, perhaps even misunderstood. They position themselves as the victim when necessary, as the only person who truly cares about you. As long as you believe in that illusion, they have leverage. But once you see through it, that leverage disappears, and they know it. This is where the real struggle begins. They won't let go easily. They will test you, push you, try to regain the upper hand. They may act like nothing has changed, subtly trying to pull you back in, making you question your newfound awareness. Or they may lash out, realizing how much they stand to lose if you truly break free. Their reaction depends on their personality, on how deeply entrenched they are in their narcissistic tendencies, on how much they fear losing control over you. Some will turn on the charm, trying to win you back, pretending to be the person you once admired. Others will become aggressive, cruel, desperate to reestablish dominance. But no matter how they respond, one thing remains true. The moment you see them clearly, you can never unsee it. That's why this realization is so powerful. It's not just about understanding who they are, it's about understanding how they have influenced you. You begin to see how they have shaped your thoughts, controlled your emotions, manipulated your reactions, and with that awareness comes the ability to choose differently. They sense it immediately, the way you carry yourself, the way you hesitate before responding, the way your energy changes. It all signals to them that something is different. They know when their words no longer land the way they used to, when their manipulation no longer confuses you. And that realization unsettles them deeply. They will do everything in their power to undo that moment of clarity, to pull you back into their web of control, because once you see through them, their influence weakens. And that's something they cannot afford. The narcissist's mask isn't just a tool, it's the foundation of their existence. It's something they have carefully constructed over time, a false self that allows them to function in the world while hiding who they really are. This mask makes them appear charming, intelligent, caring, or even vulnerable when it serves their interests. It shields them from exposure, from accountability, from the consequences of their actions. It is also their primary weapon, the tool they use to manipulate and control those around them. But the moment you see through it, the cracks begin to show. Narcissists have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of deception, crafting an identity that serves their needs while keeping others in a perpetual state of confusion. They rely on the fact that most people won't look too closely, won't ask too many questions, won't trust their own instincts enough to challenge the illusion. And for a long time, you may have unknowingly played along, accepting their version of reality because it seemed easier than constantly doubting yourself. But once you start noticing the inconsistencies, once you recognize the manipulative patterns, the illusion unravels. It's like the stage lights shifting, revealing the wires, the props, the poorly constructed scenery that once seemed so convincing. You begin to notice how their words don't always match their actions, how their reactions feel rehearsed, how their charm seems calculated rather than genuine. And once you see these things, there's no going back. The narcissist picks up on this change almost instantly. They are highly attuned to shifts in perception because their entire existence depends on maintaining control over how others see them. They have spent so much time carefully crafting their image that they can sense even the slightest signs of doubt, a moment of hesitation before you respond, a shift in your tone, a lack of enthusiasm in your usual praise. These tiny clues tell them everything they need to know. When they sense this shift, their first instinct is to double down. They may try to reinforce the illusion, working harder to convince you that you're mistaken, that what you think you see isn't real. They might suddenly become overly affectionate, showering you with attention and praise in a way that feels out of character. This is a test. They are watching to see if you will buy into their performance, if you will allow them to slip back into the role they have always played. If you do, they will breathe a sigh of relief knowing they still have control. But if you don't, if you remain distant, if you continue to question, if you hold on to your clarity, their mask will crack even further, their frustration will grow, they will begin to lose control. At this point, they may lash out, accusing you of being paranoid, ungrateful, or even cruel. They may twist the situation, making themselves the victim, trying to convince you that you are the one causing harm. This is the moment when their true nature starts to emerge, when their carefully maintained facade begins to crumble, when their usual tricks stop working, when they can no longer control how you see them, they start to unravel. They may become reckless, saying things they never would have admitted before. They may contradict themselves in ways that are impossible to ignore, exposing the lies that once held everything together. And beneath it all, you will see their fear, because a narcissist without their mask is vulnerable in a way they cannot handle. Their entire identity is built on the belief that they are in control, that they are superior, that they are untouchable. When someone sees through their facade, it threatens not only their ability to manipulate, but their entire sense of self. And that is something they are never prepared to face. The ability to set boundaries. Narcissists despise boundaries because they limit their control. But once you see through their tactics, you understand the importance of standing firm in your decisions. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself, to justify your choices, or to seek their approval. You realize that their reactions are not your responsibility, and that protecting your peace is more important than trying to keep them satisfied. This shift in power dynamics is what ultimately makes the narcissist lose control over you. They thrive on your compliance, but when you refuse to engage in their games, they lose the ability to manipulate you. They may continue their attempts, but with each failed effort, their influence over you weakens. With awareness comes freedom, the freedom to walk away without guilt, the freedom to trust yourself again, and the freedom to live your life without the constant weight of their manipulation. And for the narcissist, that is the one thing they cannot tolerate, because once you see them for who they truly are, you can never unsee it. And once you take back control of your own reality, their power over you is lost forever. You the strength to set boundaries that the narcissist will test, push, and attempt to break, but boundaries that ultimately protect you from their influence. You begin to realize that you do not have to explain yourself to them. You do not have to justify your feelings or prove your worth. Their approval is not something you need to seek, because you now understand that their perception of you was never based on reality, but rather on their need to control the narrative. Once you stop playing their game, once you refuse to be drawn into their manipulations, their power diminishes. The narcissist may fight harder at first, sensing that they are losing their grip. They may become more aggressive, more persistent, more desperate. But in the end, their tactics lose effectiveness because you are no longer the same person you were before. You are no longer the person who blindly accepted their version of reality, who questioned yourself every time they denied the truth, who felt responsible for their emotions. You now see them clearly for what they are, and that is something they cannot change, no matter how hard they try. This awareness also allows you to heal, because when you are no longer caught in the cycle of their manipulation, you can begin to rebuild your sense of self. Narcissistic abuse often leaves deep emotional wounds, eroding your self-esteem, your trust in others, and even your belief in your own reality. But once you have clarity, you can start the process of undoing that damage. You can reconnect with your own inner voice, reclaim your confidence, and begin to trust yourself again. Healing does not happen overnight, but every step you take away from their influence is a step toward freedom. The narcissist will never truly change. They may adapt their tactics, they may put on a new mask, they may find new ways to manipulate, but the fundamental nature of who they are remains the same. They are driven by the need to control, to dominate, to maintain their false self at all costs. And once you understand this, you are no longer vulnerable in the way you once were. You recognize that their actions are not about you, but about their own deep-seated fears and insecurities. And with this understanding, you gain the ultimate power, the power to walk away, to reclaim your life, and to break free from their grip completely. Everything that happened can keep you trapped in a cycle of doubt and hesitation. Rebuilding self-trust means learning to hear your inner voice again, recognizing your own experiences and reminding yourself that your perceptions are real and valid. It means acknowledging that you saw what you saw, felt what you felt, and that your reality is not something that can be dismissed or debated. Healing also requires working through the emotional aftermath that comes from being manipulated, gaslit, and devalued. You may go through waves of grief. Grief for the person you believed they were, grief for the time you lost, grief for the version of yourself that existed before them. These emotions may feel overwhelming, but they are necessary. Avoiding them will only make the healing process longer. You need to allow yourself to fully experience everything, to grieve what was, and to let go of the emotional weight they left behind. Another crucial part of healing is letting go of self-blame. It's easy to look back and question why you stayed, why you missed the red flags, why you allowed yourself to be treated in such a way. But blaming yourself is just another way to keep yourself stuck in their shadow. The truth is, you didn't know then what you know now. You did the best you could with the knowledge and emotional strength you had at the time. Now that you can see things clearly, your focus shouldn't be on punishing yourself for the past, but on using what you've learned to safeguard yourself in the future. Rebuilding your sense of self-worth is also an essential part of the healing process. Narcissists gradually erode your confidence, making you feel small, insignificant, and reliant on their approval. Now, you must unlearn everything they conditioned you to believe about yourself. You are not weak, you are not unworthy, and you are not defined by their version of you. A big part of this journey is surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, who see your value, who remind you of the person you were before the narcissist tried to reshape your story. It's about reconnecting with what makes you feel strong, capable, and whole again. Another important step in healing is redefining what love and connection mean to you. The narcissist conditioned you to link love with instability, manipulation, and emotional distress. You may have grown used to relationships that feel like a constant battle for validation, where affection is given and taken away as a means of control. Now you have the chance to rewire those associations. Love is not meant to be a game, a competition, or a source of suffering. It is not supposed to leave you feeling anxious, uncertain, or unworthy. Real love is steady, respectful, and built on mutual care, not power struggles and emotional manipulation. As you continue healing, you may realize that cutting ties completely with the narcissist is necessary. This is often one of the hardest steps, because they likely made you feel responsible for them in some way. They may have convinced you that you are the only one who truly understands them, the only one who can help them, the only one who matters to them. But this is just another form of manipulation. They do not need your help, and you do not owe them anything. Walking away, whether physically or emotionally, is not abandonment, it is self-preservation. Healing does not follow a straight path. Some days you will feel strong, confident, and sure that you have moved beyond their influence. Other days you may feel triggered, angry, or even nostalgic. This is normal. The key is not to let the difficult days make you forget how much progress you have made. Every step you take toward healing is a victory. Every boundary you set, every moment of self-trust you rebuild, every time you choose yourself over them, that is proof that you are breaking free. In the end, awareness is your greatest power. Once you see the narcissist for who they truly are, their ability to control and manipulate you begins to crumble. This clarity allows you to trust your instincts, set firm boundaries, and disengage from their emotional traps. You no longer seek their approval or validation because you understand that their actions are not a reflection of your worth, but of their own insecurities and need for control. The moment you stop reacting as they expect, their hold over you weakens. They may escalate their tactics, but your awareness shields you from falling back into their web. With this newfound clarity, you reclaim your emotional freedom, your confidence, and your ability to live on your own terms. The narcissist fears your awareness because it disrupts their carefully crafted illusion, but once you see through the mask, you can never unsee it, and in that truth lies your liberation.